Long before the dawn of civilization, legend has it that a people of advanced technology, government, and imperial ambitions lived on an island continent called Atlantis. Until it was suddenly destroyed, gone forever. But did it really exist? 2,300 years after the tale was first told, people are still searching for clues to Atlantis and its mysterious people.
I believe Atlantis is real.
But I believe it was an actual civilization. The civilization was destroyed and there are remnants of that culture or civilization spread throughout the planet.
So do the ruins of Atlantis still lie on the seafloor? And did Atlantean survivors teach the Egyptians how to build the pyramids? Or lay the foundations of the Mayan world? Did they change human history with technology beyond their time? Examine the evidence with believers and skeptics alike as science goes in search of the elusive, lost continent of Atlantis. The idea of Atlantis has captured the modern imagination like few other myths. According to legend, it was the most fertile of plains, with a palace in the middle, surrounded by alternating moats of land and sea. A continent the size of Asia and Libya combined. It was an island paradise created by the offspring of the Greek god Poseidon, sophisticated, egalitarian, and peaceful for many generations. The Atlanteans were an honorable people that worshipped bulls, walked with elephants, and feasted on coconuts. But as their godlike qualities diminished and human nature took over, they became warlike and greedy. Then, in one day and one night, after a series of earthquakes and floods, Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. It's a great story, but is it history or imagination? There are some who think it's real.
Most people believe that Atlantis is simply a myth or a story, but I believe it was an actual civilization.
I think that there were some Atlanteans who survived the catastrophe that drowned most of what is now Atlantis.
Atlantis hunters tend to fall into two broad categories: those looking for the lost continent itself, and those who search for evidence that survivors of Atlantis left their mark on the ancient monuments of history. But where they all start is with Plato, the great Greek philosopher, who around 360 BC wrote the book, so to speak, on the lost continent of Atlantis, in the form of two philosophical dialogues titled Timaeus and Critias. These writings have become a treasure map passed down for generations. Many have chosen to follow it, leading to vastly different conclusions about the whereabouts of Atlantis. That's largely because Plato's landmarks are hard to interpret. He describes Atlantis as situated in front of the straits, which are called the Pillars of Heracles. Tradition holds that the Pillars of Heracles are actually the Strait of Gibraltar at the mouth of the Mediterranean. Trouble is, there's a whole world outside the strait. Some believe that nearby islands such as the Azores and the Canaries might fit the bill as the remnants of Atlantis, while others have placed this elusive utopia in almost every far-flung place on the map. Antarctica, the South China Sea, Ireland, Spain, the Americas, the Andes Mountains, even at the bottom of a lake in the Dominican Republic.
Did Atlantis actually exist? Well, Plato doesn't say yes or no. He acts as if it did and gives us an incredibly detailed description of everything that is in the land of Atlantis. That it's an island, that it's got concentric rings of water and earth. So you go earth, then water, then earth, then water, with the passageway in between so boats could get in there.
So, we have a map and a description. But so far, Atlantis hunters haven't managed to locate the ruins of Atlantis itself. But tracking the supposed survivors has yielded some interesting results. Some believers think perhaps Atlanteans survived the catastrophic event that destroyed their world and washed ashore in far-flung places. And in doing so, these exiles brought their superior knowledge to nascent cultures. And for Atlantis believers, there's no better evidence than the awe-inspiring monuments of ancient Egypt. How, they argue, could an undeveloped population have suddenly begun to create such spectacular structures? How could they have mastered the complex mathematics or carved such perfect angles with copper tools? Their answer? The Egyptians had help. The Valley Temple at Giza is a remarkable piece of work. It was constructed from hundreds of limestone blocks encased with red granite slabs, many exceeding 150 tons in weight. That's 3 times the size of the largest stones at the famous Stonehenge in southern England.
The Atlanteans, according to the ancient records, say that they brought these stones here from over 600 miles away. How did they do that?
Good question. Atlantean architects worked on everything from the temples at Angkor Wat in Cambodia to the statues on Easter Island in the South Pacific. And they even made it to the Americas. In Mexico, local legends had long told of bearded white gods who came from beyond the sea ages ago. One man thinks that those visitors may have been Atlanteans, not gods, and that they gave the Maya a hand with their majestic temples. Anthropologist and author George Erickson has studied the Maya for 30 years. He noticed something seemingly impossible at the temples of Uxmal and Kohun Lich.
Plato wrote about the presence of elephants in Atlantis. People have said, well, there could not have been any elephants in the Americas. Yet here in the middle of the Yucatan Peninsula, we find an elephant with its forehead, the eyes of the elephant, and a perfect carving of an elephant trunk.
We'll be taking a closer look at the Egyptian and Maya anomalies later on, in addition to some mysterious underwater structures. And we'll be joining a geologist who has long studied what many believe to be the smoking gun of the Atlantis story. An ancient weapon of mass destruction that could have wiped out a civilization.
In every myth, there has to be a kernel of truth. It's my opinion that the kernel of truth is usually related to a natural catastrophe, something unexpected, so horribly unexpected that you cannot forget it.
But to get at that kernel of truth, we need to follow in the footsteps of the great Atlantis hunters who went before. Plato's compelling account of the doomed civilization called Atlantis has always fanned the imaginations of readers. But it wasn't until the modern age that a congressman named Ignatius Donnelly brought it back into the limelight. Born in Philadelphia in 1831, Donnelly was always a believer in the possibility of a perfect society. He even helped to found a utopian town called Ninninger City in Minnesota, only to have it fail almost immediately. Undaunted, he wrote a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. In his mind, Atlantis was the Garden of Eden, the root of every successful ancient civilization, the origin of Greek gods and goddesses. Donnelly located Atlantis around the Azores. The idea of Atlantis then caught on in Germany in the early 1900s, where a secret society called the Thule sent expeditions all over the world in an effort to find evidence of an Aryan race. They believed that the home of the Aryan race was none other than Atlantis, which they pinpointed somewhere near Greenland and Iceland. During World War II, Adolf Hitler reportedly ordered the infamous Luftwaffe to divert from its wartime missions to search for Atlantis. But the person who really put Atlantis back on the map was the extraordinary, self-proclaimed psychic, Edgar Cayce. He claimed that he had visions of a continent which had gone through 3 major periods of physical division, leaving it as a group of islands, probably in the Caribbean. According to him, its citizens built laser-like crystals for power plants. which eventually overcharged and caused a horrible explosion on the island. Casey also claimed to have had a vision in which he learned that the Sphinx had been built in 10,500 BC. That's 8,000 years before the scientific consensus. And that survivors of Atlantis had concealed beneath it a hall of records containing all the wisdom of their lost civilization and the true history of the human race. Casey predicted that proof of the existence of Atlantis would be found in the Bahamas in 1968 or 1969. And sure enough, in 1968, pilots flying over the island of Bimini spotted this structure from the sky. 1,600 yards of stone organized into what is now referred to as the Bimini Road. Some believe it is an ancient man-made breakwater which enclosed a harbor. Years later, another similar structure was found off the island Andros. This was dubbed the Andros Road.
I believe that the Bimini Road and the Andros Road are related to my concept of Atlantis, because this is part of the Bahama Bank, which would have been above water, and part of the island continent of Atlantis at the time Plato ascribes to Atlantis' destruction.
Just as the elephant sculptures at Uxmal seemed out of place to him, so too do some of the magnificent carvings at the Maya ruin of Kohun Lich. Erickson scales the Temple of the Masks, a pyramid whose central stairway is flanked by huge stone faces. For him, this particular mask is a dead giveaway that non-Maya people were here before the time of construction, and that someone carved their likenesses on this temple.
This is a Mayan stucco face of the rain god Chak, but it has Atlantean features: a long face, a square jaw, definite mustache, curly mustaches on either side, high brow, long aquiline nose.
How do we know what Atlanteans look like? We don't, but according to Erickson, we do know what they don't look like. And they don't look like the Maya.
The Mayans didn't have facial hair. They were round-faced, and they were shallow-faced.
On this trip, Erickson has come to collect more evidence to prove his theory that the Maya were not the first people to live in the Yucatan Peninsula. Conventional archaeologists have long believed that the first people to colonize the Americas followed large game across a land bridge from Siberia to Alaska and migrated south. However, George Erickson believes that the ancient Atlanteans reached the Americas even earlier. He conjectures that at one point near the end of the last ice age, the Yucatan Peninsula, Cuba, and the Bahamas were each larger in size, which science corroborates. But according to Erickson, something cataclysmic caused the planet's ice to melt, leading to rising seas and swamping Atlantis.
I believe that the cataclysm that destroyed Atlantis was the result of a great flood. But that flood itself was the result of something like an asteroid or comet striking the Earth. I believe Atlantis is real. There are some silly claims about Atlantis that can be easily discounted. However, that there was a seagoing civilization that pioneered architecture, art, concepts of mathematics, and concepts of social interaction that led to a golden age. I believe this has existed, and that it was destroyed by a flood, and that is still with us in the Mayan presence in Central America.
According to ancient records, some indigenous people in Central America did have tales of visits from godlike white seafarers. What about Egypt, however? According to some believers, hieroglyphics on the walls of temples in Egypt constitute hard evidence of such a people. Could it be that the Atlanteans actually came to Egypt to teach the Egyptians how to build the Sphinx and the pyramids? Could they have left their records in libraries under the Sphinx itself? To many fans of a real Atlantis, all roads lead back to Egypt, the ultimate tourist destination. The Stargate of the Gods tour, led by William Henry, journeys here not simply to wonder at the wisdom of the ancient Egyptians, but to question whether such an early civilization could have erected such perfect structures on its own.
The reason people come on the Stargate of the Gods tour is because they sense that they haven't been told the whole story. And what they want to do is expand their imagination, look at the same evidence that others are looking at from a slightly different perspective, and then to experience the temples themselves and see with their own eyes what everybody's so excited about.
The group takes a boat down the Nile to the majestic Temple of Horus at Edfu. The best preserved temple in Egypt, it was completed in 57 BC and was dedicated to the falcon-headed god Horus. Like many temples in Egypt, history is literally written on the walls. William Henry has brought us here to show us what he believes is actual physical proof of the existence of Atlantis.
What we're looking at are texts at the Edfu Temple that tell the story of the original extraterrestrial beings that came to Earth and created the original island on Earth that is very similar to Plato's story about Atlantis.
The Sphinx, the Valley Temple, and the famous pyramids are more than just monuments. They are hard evidence that the Atlanteans once lived in Egypt. Most Egyptologists believe that this colossal limestone half-lion, half-man was built around the same time as the pyramids, in approximately 2500 BC. William Henry believes that it must have been built much earlier. He subscribes to Edgar Cayce's theory that a Hall of Records, Atlantean records, was swirled away underneath the Sphinx closer to 10,000 BC. And he surmises that the Atlanteans hid the records there after supervising the construction of the Sphinx.
Nobody knows for sure what is buried underneath here, but it's widely speculated, and some of it is affirmed by scientific evidence, that there are chambers beneath here, just as portrayed here on the Sphinx stele.
Still, many people believe that it does exist, including engineer Bill Brown, who has made finding the Hall of Records the goal of his life. Brown has spent many weeks charting maps of the area using a GPS system and ground-penetrating radar. And he thinks he's found something.
I came here with evidence that we would find something underground here. We have that evidence now, and what we have found here is a device 32 feet underground, a cavern that has been verified. The cavern is to a depth that we have right now of 125 feet. It's full of mud, and within that mud are some casings.
Casings holding what? Atlantean records? Brown's convinced he's on the verge of a major discovery.
The Halls of Records is about the Atlantean race. It's the history of Atlantis before it fell, why it fell, and it was left for us as a lesson to learn so that we might not make the same mistake.
While in Egypt, the Stargate of the Gods tour had hoped to lend a hand while Bill Brown broke ground in search of the Hall of Records. But permission to dig has yet to be granted. So they'll have to settle for a special tour inside the Great Pyramid. Henry leads the way through the labyrinth and up a ladder into a large cavernous room. The group is inspired to meditate.
We're inside the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. A very powerful place for meditation and connections and stellar energies.
The group is astounded by the huge red granite blocks which make up this room. Henry believes that, like the walls of the Valley Temple, they are so large that they could only have been placed there by a superhuman technology, such as the Atlanteans supposedly used. As William Henry emerges from the Great Pyramid, the sun has started to set. He is transformed by what he has seen inside.
Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Truly wondrous.
Wondrous indeed. But could Atlanteans really have come to Earth and built these ancient structures? And if so, how did they get here? Henry thinks the answer may be found in a place called Abu Gharaib.
It's one of the most important ceremonial centers in all of ancient Egypt. But now what we're beginning to discover is that it might have immense significance in the Atlantis theory.
Henry believes that the Atlanteans were born in the constellation of the Pleiades, star beings. William Henry may be looking for answers in the stars, but many historians and scientists feel that the story of Atlantis is just that, a story.